Alright, so today, in this video, I'm just going to teach you a little tiny thing about how object references work. And even though you might think that it's not very significant, it's actually very important in how you're going to approach, you know, variables in any programming language, except especially in Java. So, there's a difference between declaration and initialization of a variable. So in here I have the sample person sub z equals new person Sally 8. You don't really need to worry about like what the actual code of this stuff means, but basically just say that we're making people and each person has a name, which is a string, and an age, which is an int. And so for example here we've made something called sub z, and that's a variable, and that is sub z is an object reference. Now keep in mind that an object reference has no spot, takes no spot on the memory. It's basically just it's basically just a name or a label that we use to access something on the memory, and that something on the memory is this new person Sally, comma 8. So basically, this is an 8-year-old named Sally, and then we've got sub y, which is another person called Magnus, who's 42 years old. And basically, what you need to keep in mind is that sub y, we can use sub y to access the information in Magnus, who is 42 years old, but you need to keep in mind that it's just a reference for it, and it's not the actual spot on the computer's memory. So you have to really separate between what's the reference, which is sub z and sub y, or it can be literally anything you want to name it, and what's the actual object on the computer's memory. So on the computer's memory, we've got Sally, who's 8. That's nice little drawing of a girl. And we've got Magnus, who's 42 and looks, not like the nicest guy in the world. So sub z is almost just a connection to Sally, who is 8 years old. It isn't inherently Sally. And one way we can mess around with that is this. So right now we can use sub z and sub y to find their ages and find their names, and we use these labels, sub z and sub y, to access the information, because otherwise the information would exist, but we wouldn't know how to access it. So, for example, if I were to ask you what sub z's age is, you would go, "Hey, sub z, what's your age?" And sub z would say, "Oh, I don't know. Let me look at the object that I'm representing." And it goes into the computer's memory and finds good old Sally right here. And it says, I'm connected to Sally. So when they ask for my age, they're really asking for Sally's age. And that's 8. Whoops, sorry. And likewise, if we ask sub y, "Hey, what's your age?" It says, "Well, I'm connected to Magnus." And I'm assuming that they're talking about Magnus. So I'm going to go with 42. However, look what we did here. We did sub z equals sub y. And that's going to do something weird. What is that going to do? Well, it's actually going to erase this object reference that we've built to from sub z to to good old Sally here, right? It's going to erase that and instead connect it to Magnus, right? So sub z equals sub y. It says, "Sub z, you are now an object reference for Magnus." You're now an object reference for whatever sub y is an object reference for, which happens to be Magnus, right? And now pay attention. Sally's got no connections to her, right? So now what happens if we ask, "Hey, what is sub z's age?" Well, we say, "Hey, sub z, what's your age?" Sub z says, "Oh, well, let's see, what am I connected to? I'm connected to Magnus." And therefore, it says 42 years old, right? And we say, hey, sub y, what's your age? It says, well, I'm also connected to Magnus, so I'm also going to get you 42 years old. In a sense, look, we have two different variables. We have sub z and sub y, but at the end of the day, they're both two different object references that reference the same object, and that object is Magnus. And so you might ask, hey, what happens to Sally? Because, hey, Sally doesn't have any connections to her anymore. And what that means is that there is no way that we can access Sally in our memory anymore. There's no variable connected to her. So we can't call any methods. We can't access any of the variables or information stored inside her. And we actually lose out on Sally, and Sally is deleted from the computer once the computer realizes, oh wow, there's no variables connected to it. A garbage collector basically just says, okay, this information on the computer's circuit, this information on the computer's memory, nobody's going to be able to access it anymore, so just delete it. And they do delete it. So, at the end of the day, Magnus is victorious. But to really sum it up, you need to understand the difference between an object reference, which is sub z or sub y or whatever you want to name it, and an actual object, which is a Magnus or a Sally, that's on the computer's memory but doesn't have a variable name to it. But that's just a little important thing that you need to understand. And it's okay if you don't, because that's literally, I would say, from what I've seen in computer science classes that I've taken, that seems to be the one thing that a lot of people, even to the end of the year, they don't understand it. And if you do understand it, you just become a much better programmer. But if you don't understand it, just keep in mind that, you're in good company, and that you should never be ashamed to ask a question. So if you have any questions, leave it in the comments, and I'll try to help you out.